I'm not sure why I'm writing this right now. Hell, I'm not even sure if I'm writing this now or if I am not. Whether the words I am seeing in my mind's eye are the same as the words my hands are typing. I suppose the only way to find out is to check tomorrow and see if it's still there. If it is, and it still looks like this, then I'll know it wasn't just some dream I was having with my eyes open. Dream. Even the word right now makes me feel some guttural part of me tense up. And I'm not surprised. After all, my dreams are the reason why I'm even awake at this hour. Everyone else in my house is asleep right now, well, except for my mom. But she tends to wake up around 4 a.m. like clockwork. Hell, she doesn't even need an alarm. I'm looking back at what I've written so far, and I realize I've been rambling. I tend to do that, simply because my thoughts tend to get scattered, kind of like a dandelion, when I don't completely concentrate. There's only so much concentration you can give something when you keep getting flashes of terror every time you blink. It might just be that I'm doing it so that I can stay awake as long as possible by writing. Either way, I should probably at least explain what I'm babbling about sometime before my parents find me awake like this. I've been a student at a London university for a year now, studying psychology. I would be in my second year, but I had to stop midway through. I was hoping at some point to be a counseling psychologist, to help people get past their problems without being the guy who forces a prescription down their throat. It went fine for the first semester. I even managed to make a few friends, which was an achievement for someone as socially awkward as I was. For the first few months, I would hang out with a small group of people, all of whom shared my same weird interests. We'd talk about the usual nerdy pop culture we digested that week, about how we all threw our shoes at the television when a certain character in one of our favorite shows had been killed off very ignorantly and needlessly by a bear. That kind of shit. Of course, as close as we get, we never seem to see each other outside of lecture days, which it suited me just fine. I remember exactly the day that my current predicament started. I only call it that because even now, 6 months later, I still don't know what the hell it is. It was February 2nd when we had received a foreign exchange student from Canada. I'm not going to name him here, partly because he wouldn't want me to, and partly because I don't want this to come back to him. It was clear on the first day that he wasn't the talkative type, so it wasn't surprising that he started gravitating towards our little clique. He seemed enthused about what we were saying, and he even managed to get some of the references we had flung out about some of the TV shows that are more localized in Britain. But none of our geeky bullshit would even stimulate a reaction with him quite as his extensive knowledge of urban legends. Now, I'm not talking sewer alligators of New York. I'm talking the kind you see on the dark underbelly of the internet. The ones that make your palms sweat and give you a nervous tick whenever you read about them. The first time he ever mentioned his hobby was after a lecture we had been given on neurotransmitters that were involved with fear. Our lecturer, on one of his slides, had put a rather disturbing image of a dog with a malicious grin across its muzzle, in an effort to demonstrate one of the technical variations of fear. Needless to say, it worked. After we left, our new Canadian friend told me and the group about the image, where it had come from, and he went into great length about the mythos surrounding what he called smile.jpg. At one point, I remember him using the word creepypasta, and one of my friends, who we'll call Michael, inquired after the obvious quip about a haunted ravioli. After a quick explanation on what he had meant, our friend continued on to say that, according to the smile dog myth, everyone who saw the image and didn't pass it on to someone else would be plagued with nightmares, which would be clouded by the creature in the picture. After joking away the macabre subject and going on our separate ways, I took the Canadian aside, curious about where I could find the original story at the point. After joking away the subject and going on our separate ways, I had taken the Canadian aside, curious about where I could find the original story. At that point, I thought it might give me a good laugh, and when he had told me to listen to a narration on YouTube for the best effect, it didn't take long to find what I was looking for. Of course, being the cynical asshole I was back then, it did make me giggle a little to think that something as simple as a Photoshop picture of a husky could inspire such fear in people. But even more curious, I kept going on to the topic of creepypastas to see what else I could find. What most of it was the same shit about being stalked by creatures with no face or eyes as big as dinner plates with claws the size of arms, or the trope about some kid picking up a bootleg copy of a nostalgic game and only find out that the main character had been warped into some sadistic shadow of its original self. But some of them actually sent a real visceral chill down my spine, which really surprised me. I think about 2 a.m. the next morning, I had watched about 20 different videos of narrated creepypastas, and I was already ready for bed. I didn't have anything resembling an early morning lecture the next day, but I knew I had to have been up, and up around 10 o'clock. Now, I always consider myself a rational human being, not prone to believing the Bogarts and other sorts, but for the life of me, I swear, I couldn't keep my eyes closed for 5 seconds without flinching from some gut feeling that there was another presence in my room. And in my mind's eye, I kept metamorphosing from one form to the another. And after around half an hour of my futile sleep, I decided that was enough and that I should go into my kitchen and get something to calm myself down. As soon as I had put my hand on the wood door of the kitchen on my way back to my room, a sense of danger had jabbed me inside of my stomach, just like it had before in my room. I got the same irrational feeling that I wasn't alone, so I spun around, my eyes scanning everywhere for every facet of the brightly lit kitchen, even checking the doors of some of the cabinets, and saw nothing. I sighed, and knowing that I was just binging on the horror stories and it was just getting to me. And it was my own fault for listening to so many of them, especially so late at night, so I went down the corridor back to my room. As I opened the door, I did my best to swallow down the feeling of dread that was accumulating in my gullet like a stone. And when it was open all the way, I did take a step back for a second. My breathing picked up as I stared wide-eyed at the empty space where my bed had once sat. Everything was gone, from the crates underneath to the posters on the wall, leaving a barren white-walled corner. As I stared in disbelief, I heard a soft, muffled whisper of a chuckle from one of the nearby rooms. As I stared in disbelief, I heard a soft, muffled whisper of a chuckle from one of the nearby rooms. Thinking that maybe one of my roommates was just playing a prank on me, I smiled and I looked back at the door behind me that led to Jenna's room. Jenna was the only person that I got along with in my corridor, and she even showed up in some of my lectures, as her sociology course sometimes overlapped with mine. I quietly knocked on the door, and I heard a lock click, and I came in ready to confront her. "All right, Jenna, I know you took my bed, so..." My words died in my throat as I looked in Jenna's room, or should have been Jenna's room. As I gaped blankly at the doorway, I saw my room exactly the way it was, right down to the last detail, and sat in the bed was a young man who had bedraggled red hair, exactly the same as mine. Looking down at the floor, he was making some sort of sound as he held his face to his hands, and to this day I still don't know whether he was laughing or crying, but it was a wheezy, choked noise that ran through me like a cold breeze. I dared not move. I didn't even blink through my eyes, though they were becoming itchy and irritated. I blinked once, and in a short time between closing my eyes and opening them, something flashed against the inside of my eyelids, too quickly for me to figure out what it was. And when my eyes opened again, it was face down against my keyboard, which had grown tired of waiting, so I turned it off and went to stand by. I let out a haggard relief of breath. I was only a dream. Just a bad dream. I was reassured the next night when my dreams had returned to normal. Hell, I don't even remember what it was I was dreaming about that night. All I remember was waking up the next morning after, like always, and get on with my day. It was a long lecture day, though, and I remember being almost completely wiped out when I had left for the lecture hall about 6 p.m. Cursing my allergy to caffeine, I would have killed for an espresso right then. I remember feeling slightly on edge as I was walking down to the path to my hall of residence. I put it down to the cold winds of the darkness at the time, but I couldn't shake the ominous feeling that I held in my gut as my eyes darted around the darkened campus grounds. It was the same feeling as I had in my dream, that feeling of being watched. I heard a sound against the wind buffering my ears. It wasn't quite a giggle, but it wasn't quite a sob, and it seemed choked and gargling, as if both had been stuck in my throat, of whatever it had been that made that weird, ominous sound the night before. The hairs raised on my back, and I knew that noise. The sound was getting closer, and every time I took a step, it just kept on getting closer, no matter how hurried my stride was. I knew I'd look like a pussy to whoever was watching, but I had to run. The sound was right by my ear, and as I touched the front door of my hall, I jerked awake and I looked around to an empty lecture hall. I had dozed off again. I was, as you can guess, as unnerved as they come when I came to leaving the lecture hall. My hurried pace was brought into question several times by my friends, but unwillingly to talk, I brushed off their questions. Repeatedly, an instance of, "It's nothing really. I'm just being silly." They decided to leave me be, but disgruntled in another direction. It was about 6:15 when my hall was inside again, and that's when I heard that noise, that goddamn choking laugh again, echoing in the distance. This time I knew I was not going to take my chances, so I bolted. And as my legs pounded, my body lurched forward in an abject of fear. I heard the giggle slowly ascend into the mangled crack that grew louder and even more fervent from as I run. I didn't even make it to the door before I felt a hand clutch my throat. I awoke again in my room and looked at the clock, which had long since been abandoned trying to wake me up. I recoiled in surprise. I had woken up at 8:30 p.m. I had to check twice to make sure that it was in fact evening time and not just early in the morning, but it was. I'd slept through the entire lecture day. Up until that point, I had never done that before in my life. Hell, I didn't even take sick days when I was a kid. But now I'd missed a whole day for no reason. But still, from the dream, I wouldn't have sworn I was at the lecture. The worst part was the pebble that had sent off the snowball. My dreams became worse and worse for the next few weeks. I'd awaken several times every night in a hard sweat and have to gnaw a little at some point on one of my fingers just to make doubly sure that I was awake. If I had drawn blood, real blood that I could taste, then I felt real pain from it. Only then would I calm down. I would gotten a bandage for my finger for weeks, and people would be starting to notice that man, creature thing, whatever it was. I saw it sitting on my bed. Was there every single one of my dreams? It would always just appear in random places in my dreams, environments, always keeping its face obscured in its hair, and always laughing that wheezy, throaty laugh, sometimes approaching me, other times keeping its distance and just watching me. It was almost as if it was toying with me, playing with my subconscious, irrational fears for sport. Thanks to those dreams, my sleep patterns have been getting so erratic that it even got to the point where I was awoken by a security after having slept for 5 days straight. Jenna had called them after having missed me at a lecture and not seen me enter or leave my room at all that week, not even to eat or go to the toilet. Missing lectures was starting to become a habit, and my grades were beginning to suffer from it. That only served to aggravate the problem, it seemed. My coursework and the assignments were beginning to suffer as well, but in the most disturbing ways. I'll give you an example. At the end of February, we were told to carry out an assignment essay on the relative effectiveness of talking therapy to alcoholics and other chemically addicted people. I remember specifically that I had finished the write-down all the way down to the references and saved it before putting it away for later submission. Being a meticulous student, I had to urge the next day to check it again to make sure that I had missed any key points of my references. It wasn't there. I had checked the recycling bin, frantically thinking that maybe I accidentally deleted it, but it wasn't there either. I did find something else in that folder, though. It was a gigantic, unpunctuated wall of rambling nonsense that, as if someone had gotten jacked up on cocaine and decided to write an essay on whatever random word could pop into their head until they had gotten bored. Interfaced with me was text of disturbing images of corpses and small animals, ranging in size from mice to squirrels. In each picture, the animal's eyes had been removed. When I checked the time step, it read 27 to 13, 15:45. The exact time and date that I had saved the last draft of the coursework. As time went on, it was as if my idea of reality was beginning to unravel around me, as my constant nightmares began to erode my fondness of sleep. It got more and more difficult to tell when my dreams had stopped and my waking moments started. When I was in the middle of working on something, I began to see my hands reaching for me. It vanished and turned to look at me. And when my stubborn refusal to sleep flattered, I hear a low chuckle in my ear and I bolt awake again, terrified that it was too late and I had already dragged myself into another dream. Sometimes it really was. At one point I was getting so distressed that some of my dreams had begun entering into possibility, against my better judgment that it could have been just a fucking dog in a picture my lecturer had used as a fear presentation. After all, the Gideon told me that it's supposed to haunt your dreams, right? Looking back on it now, it seems stupid, but I was desperate enough to one point that I was actually had an email ready for a random smile.jpg picture I'd lifted off Google Images just in case. I didn't need to. It seemed. It showed me its face a month after the predicament. Its face still haunts me to this very second, and I see it against the blackness of my eyelids every time I close them. It happened when I awoke one day after a particularly dreamless day. I tried not to think about it too much in case I jinxed myself, but I let myself feel a small sense of relief. It was obvious that I was in dire need of a shower, it seemed, as I had been wrestling with my predicament for weeks now. Leaving little time for hygiene, I walked to my shower room. I caught a glimpse of myself in the small mirror and nearly jumped out of my skin. Having simply mistaken my reflection for someone else, it didn't take long for me to calm down and assess my appearance. My eyes had devolved into pinkish orbs of irritated veins, hooded by purplish black bags of skin that had attested from my lack of proper sleep and utter destruction to my body clock. I had grown thick, prickly beard of red hairs across my chin, and my hair now lay disheveled and greasy across my shoulders in long curtains, and I chuckled. This shower was a long time coming. That shower got rid of the aches I didn't know I had. I felt like a new man after I stepped out of the steaming glass cubicle to towel myself off. By this point, the mirror had fogged up beyond being a mirror, so to help get my hair in some semblance of order, I decided to wipe it off and sort out my hair. I froze. The blood in my veins stretched to a halt, and my breath had caught in my throat like a vice. The figure that had stared back at me from the now cleared mirror was not my reflection. It wore a face, but I swear for the life of me it wasn't me. Its mouth nearly touched the earlobes, and it was contorted into a horrible, ridiculous grin filled with yellowing teeth. The skin of itself, it seemed like it was stretched over, kind of like a mask, and its hair stuck out from its scalp with a layer of shining grease. It didn't have eyes. The sockets were just empty, featureless craters made all of more haunting to me of the sagging black bags beneath them. Despite this fact, it still managed to look like me in a way that made my mind pipe tense up like hands had been squeezing it. It laughed. It left the same gargling chuckle I had heard countless times over. But this time, it felt as if between the maniacal giggles, it was forming words with the crackling wheeze, repeating the same fragmented sentences over and over again. Missed you. I blinked and the words were scratched all over the walls. Missed you. Missed you. It had covered every bare patch of the wall, crawled frankly all over. It was then that I finally snapped. I punched the mirror as hard as I could, knowing that it had trapped me in another nightmare, and I kept punching it until the glass was either on the floor or sticking out of my hand. It was only after the last bit of my anger that I had given a crushing sense of defeat as I slumped down into the corner that it had dawned on me. My hands were hurting. I flipped out. According to Jenna, when I had asked her about it earlier this year, I was inconsolable for the rest of the day. I was just sat in the shower room next to a pile of broken mirror shards, letting my hand bleed out as I held my head in my hands, trembling and muttering in tongues. I apparently wouldn't even let the paramedics come near me when the ambulance came. Jenna had finally arrived, of course. I remember none of this, though. My parents, being the insufferable worrywarts that they are, they had insisted I live with them at their house, and I resisted my freshman year, but they wanted to keep an eye on me. They've thrown me into a therapy program, too, for all the good that it'll do to me. Kind of ironic, if you think about it. I was going to be a therapist myself, but now I'm sitting here in the other end of the stick. I did have a mirror in my room, one of those old vanity mirrors that you sometimes get on top of chests or drawers, but it's been covered up by my request. After I told my parents what I had saw in the mirror, they went white and looked at each other as if I had threatened them with a knife. Then, with great reluctance, they had told me that when I was just turning 4, I had an imaginary friend that looked exactly like me, with what I described as a nice big toothy smile. I called him Timmy Tom, and explained that he was born without eyes, so naturally the best thing for him to do was to find a pair just like him. It started out with household objects like sequins, buttons, marbles. So many parents never paid much heed, but as soon as it became apparent that these weren't the only things he was looking for, that was when they found me cutting out the eyes of a squirrel, and fearing for my sanity, they had me, as they put it, they had me corrected. Even now, the months into therapy, I still have those dreams sometimes. Sometimes I wake up in my old bed back in the halls of my residence, wondering if, at some point, it was just another twisted dream. Sometimes I'll wake up in a padded room, the screams of other broken souls ringing through the little viewing slot in the door, and wonder if I've ever always been there. The last one seems to be the favorite place to send me. It doesn't matter where I wake up, though. It'll be somewhere when I do. Giggling, and I made a mind-curdling giggle, just to let me know that I was still at its mercy, that I was still its plaything. It's here now, just sitting in the darkest corner of my room, watching me. Right, this with a disgrinned grin spread across its face, across my face. It's wearing my face. It's not even giggling anymore. It's just sitting there. It's still wearing my face. It won't stop looking at me with that goddamn eyeless smile. It's still wearing my face. Maybe it's just wants my eyes. It has had the rest of my face anyway, so why doesn't it have my eyes? Either way, if I didn't have eyes, I wouldn't be able to see anymore. Maybe it got bored and go find someone else to drive insane. Now there's a thought.